Since the 1990s, genetically modified foods have been available for human consumption in the United States. Genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, are organisms that have been created through the techniques of genetic engineering. The process of genetic engineering splices DNA from one species to another. This creates combinations of plant, animal, bacteria, and viral genes that do not occur in nature or through traditional crossbreeding methods. With the increasing interest in food safety and emerging knowledge about biotechnology, foods containing GMOs have become the topic of public concern. As Commissioner of Food and Drugs for the United States Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Margaret Hamburg needs to make the labeling of foods containing GMOs mandatory because their safety for human consumption has not been sufficiently determined, a large and growing percent of Americans want proper labeling, and the American consumer has the right to know what is in their food so informed decisions regarding their health and the health of their families can be made. The majority of the American public is not directly connected to the source of the foods they eat. Therefore, regulatory institutions such as the FDA are essential in the assurance that the food sold in grocery stores is safe for consumption. According to their website, the FDA is responsible for protecting the public health by assuring that foods are safe, wholesome, sanitary, and properly labeled. And Dr. Hamburg is committed to strengthening programs and policies that enable the agency to carry out its mission to protect and promote the public health. These claims and the authority they project assumes the agency's proficiency in regulating the safety of foods. However, the safety of GMOs for human consumption has not been sufficiently determined by the FDA due to the inadequate regulations of the biotech industry. The development of biosafety systems in the United States offers a startling insight into why the current regulations of GMO foods are substandard. In his article, Systematic Risks of Genetically Modified Crops, The Need for New Approaches to Risk Assessment, genetic engineering and biosafety expert and author, Dr. Hartmut Meyer, discusses the progression of biosafety rules and regulations. When Stanley Cohen and Herbert Boyer invented the process of genetic engineering in 1973, the United States politicians began to draft regulations for the application of GMOs, which alerted those scientists that envisaged large economic potential based on their work and patents. And in 1977, a draft law for GMO regulation was stalled when Cohen convinced politicians that the results of the new technology could also have appeared in nature. Expecting a revolution in biology and an immense impact on business, genetic engineering was declared as equivalent to conventional breeding methods, meaning a GMO is not a new organism with unforeseeable risks and does not require specific regulation. It is argued by proponents of the GM industry that foods containing GMOs should not be labeled because genetically modified organisms are not different than naturally occurring organisms and consequently shouldn't be treated as if they were by labeling them. However, there is a blatant contradiction in this argument. If GMOs are no different from naturally occurring organisms, then why and how did these scientists have their work patented? In order to obtain a patent, the individual seeking the patent has to prove that their product is novel. It is preposterous to treat GMOs as novel for patenting purposes, but substantially equivalent for labeling purposes. There is a clear discrepancy in the ways genetically modified organisms are defined and viewed, making it difficult to navigate the current regulations of GM foods. The FDA exists to forge a clear path through bureaucracy and science for the American public. The federal agency claims they use risk analysis, a concept and framework fostered by the World Health Organization, to ensure that regulatory decisions about foods are science-based and transparent. However, this type of risk analysis does not pertain to the research and regulations of genetically modified organisms used in food available for human consumption, leaving the American public uneducated and their health at risk. The current regulations of GMOs do not require research to be conducted to prove the safety of genetically modified organisms used in food. The research is voluntary, conducted confidentially by the industry before putting their genetically modified product on the market. Furthermore, the data and results of the confidential research performed by the GM industry are not required to be shared with the public. This approach results in inherently flawed research due to the biased interests of the industry. Researcher, lecturer, and recently appointed International Scientist of the Year, Gilles Eric Seralini, and his team of scientists conducted an independent comparative analysis of the initial research of the GM corporation Monsanto on 3 types of their genetically modified corn: NK603, MON 810, and MON 863. Seralini stated that for the analysis, the data was obtained either through court decisions lost by Monsanto or by courtesy of governments and Greenpeace lawyers. Information regarding the safety of food potentially eaten by billions of humans worldwide should not be concealed. This data should be made available to independent researchers and scientists for further studies, and to the American public to facilitate awareness of the potential risks associated with the food they are consuming. Not to do so is contradictory to the FDA's promise of transparency. The lack of scientific integrity in determining the safety of genetically modified organisms refutes the FDA's promise to the American public to make science-based decisions regarding the regulations of food. Seralini and his team of scientists' comparative analysis concluded that Monsanto's research was insufficient, and that the corporation purposefully chose to select significant results, which fit the desired outcome of the study, and ignore significant findings which would have deemed the GM corn unsafe. Most strikingly, though, is Seralini's proclamation that Monsanto fails to demonstrate that the consumption of these GM maize feeds was indeed safe as claimed, and the researchers' profoundly disturbing conclusion of the study. In the 3 GM maize varieties that formed the basis of this investigation, new side effects linked to the consumption of these cereals were revealed. Effects were mostly concentrated in kidney and liver function, the 2 major diet detoxification organs. In addition, some effects on heart, adrenal, spleen, and blood cells were also frequently noted. Our data strongly suggests that these GM maize varieties induce a state of hepatorenal toxicity. Unintended metabolic effects due to the mutagenic properties of the GM transformation process cannot be excluded. Phil Engel, Monsanto's director of corporate communications, was quoted in the New York Times as saying, "Monsanto should not have to vouchsafe the safety of biotech food. Our interest is in selling as much of it as possible. Assuring its safety is the FDA's job." Unfortunately for the American public, the FDA has not adequately done its job in assuring the safety of genetically modified foods, but has incorrectly taken the biotech industry's word at face value on the safety of their products. Trusting a corporation with the responsibility of sufficiently determining the safety of the product they are hoping to sell is counterintuitive to the impartiality of the scientific method of research. Another unfortunate example of this is the study conducted by reproductive toxicology experts Aris Aziz and Samuel LeBlanc. Aziz and LeBlanc tested for evidence of pesticides associated with genetically modified organisms in maternal, fetal, and non-pregnant women's blood. The pesticides they tested for were glyphosate and its metabolite aminomethyl phosphoric acid, glufosinate ammonium and its metabolite 3-methylphosphinopropionic acid, and CRY1AB protein. Even though these products have been on the market for over a decade, this was the first study conducted to test for these genetically engineered toxins in the bloodstream. This is because of the biotech industry's assurance that these toxins would be broken down by the human digestive system before entering the bloodstream. However, Aziz and LeBlanc's research refutes this claim. After consuming a diet typical of a middle-class population of Western industrialized countries for the duration of the study, the researchers found evidence of these genetically engineered toxins in the bloodstreams of pregnant women, non-pregnant women, and fetuses. 3-methylphosphinopropionic acid and the metabolite glufosinate ammonium was detected in 100% of maternal and umbilical cord blood samples. an increased risk of congenital malformation in humans has been linked with exposure to glufosinate ammonium. Glufosinate ammonium has also been shown to cause growth retardation and hypoplasia in mouse embryos. CR1AB protein toxin was detected in 93% of maternal, 80% of fetal, and 63% of non-pregnant women's blood samples. The authors of this study, as well as Gil's Eric Seralini and numerous other scientists, advocates, and researchers, strongly recommend that more studies be done to sufficiently determine the safety of genetically modified organisms in food. Until these products can be proven safe, the American public has the right to know what they are consuming through proper labeling mandated by the FDA. More than 40 nations now require foods containing genetically modified organisms to be labeled, but the United States is not one of them. In their article, Willingness to Pay for GMO Labeling Policies, The Case of Korea, Dr. Jin-Xian Lee and SHU describe a study they conducted to determine if and how much the public was willing to pay for GMO labeling policies in Korea. The authors discuss what affects the varying label policies around the world, stating that, depending on the political, social, and economic climate within a region or country, different governments are responding to this problem in diverse ways. The authors compare the strict labeling practices and mandatory safety assessments in Europe and Japan with the United States' inadequate regulations of GMOs. The USA is the world's top supplier of biotech crops. Thus, its regulation for GMO are less strict than those of other countries, insinuating an inherent bias in the regulations of the biotech industry. Without proper labeling of foods containing genetically modified organisms in the United States, it is difficult for the public to decipher which foods contain GMOs. If the American public is consuming these products without realizing it, then it is reasonable to make the claim that Americans and American children are the test subjects. Concerned about the health effects of GM products, Japanese trade representatives have stated, "We will watch the development of American children over the next 10 years." However, the American public does not wish to be the guinea pigs for the biotech industry any longer. There is a large and growing percent of the American public that wants foods containing genetically modified organisms to be properly labeled. Recently named Pollster of the Year by the American Association of Political Consultants, the Mellman Group conducted a national survey regarding the labeling of GMO foods. In March of 2012, they asked if Americans would favor or oppose requiring labels for foods that have been genetically engineered or contain genetically engineered ingredients. The result was nearly unanimous. 91% were in favor of requiring foods containing GMOs to be labeled. Even after hearing arguments from both sides of the issue, 89% were still strongly in favor of labeling. In October of 2011, the Center for Food Safety filed a legal petition with Margaret Hamburg and Michael Taylor of the FDA and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius, requesting that the FDA require that foods that are genetically engineered organisms or contain ingredients derived from genetically engineered organisms, collectively referred to as GE foods, be labeled under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Over 1 million Americans signed this petition. More than 450 American organizations, businesses, and associations signed with this petition. 55 members of the United States Congress signed with this petition. It is a right of all Americans to be informed of the content of the foods they are eating and feeding to their families. Until there is credible research which sufficiently proves the safety of genetically modified foods for human consumption, the FDA needs to mandate proper labeling. The American public wants these products to be labeled. Dr. Margaret Hamburg states that a strong FDA is an agency the American public can count on. The American public is counting on her sound judgment as the head of the FDA to ensure the proper labeling of foods containing genetically modified organisms.